Distinguished Chief Guest, Mr. K.T. Tripathi, Secretary, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Most Distinguished Excellency, Ambassador, Venezuela, Your Excellency, Chairman from Sharjah for the Water and Power Authority, my distinguished colleague from the IEA, who's looking after our area, Ms. Yashoda, also my distinguished friends on the dais, Mrs. Kumar, and other distinguished participants. We are assembled today in an environment where the energy world is in transition. It is a very defining moment in the history of the energy sector. After almost a century or two of dominance, where coal and oil provided the various industrial revolutions across Europe, United States, and more recently China, which are the examples of prosperity and development. We are moving to an era now where the renewables seem to be the flavor of the season. In fact, it's not only a flavor of the season, it has become an imperative. Because energy is inextricably linked to economics, to equity, and the environment. And if we ignore any of these three, that particular source of energy will either become irrelevant or be unacceptable. How is the energy world moving today? Is a story before all of us. Just earlier in the week, we had a conference organized by Terry where our Honorable Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, spoke at length also on energy transitions, and I also happened to be chairing the presentation session. It's not only how we produce energy, it's how we use energy, and how energy efficiency can come in, and how financially we are to meet this transition are issues, I think, which are there before the global community. Quite paradoxically, renewables, which were earlier being mocked at for their price by the conventional fossil fuel energy sources, are now beginning to tease the conventional energy sector. The latest tariff for solar energy in India is under 3 rupees a unit, which is a vast improvement from about 20 rupees a unit when I was Secretary of Power. The tables have turned, and the fossil fuel sector must sit up and reinvent itself and move out of its complacency. I think that is the clarion call of the moment. The era of dominance, the development of technologies based on fossil fuels, which were the architects of the Industrial Revolution, our prosperity in the developed world, have begun to change. Environment is more appealing to today's generation of young people, as development was ours in our generation, to ours in our generation. We have to move now to see that the world is a cleaner place, it's more efficient, we don't use up our resources, and somewhere down the line, we forget water is also a resource which, besides the environment, is going to link itself up to the future development story. We have some learning experiences from Europe and China. My friends have dwelt on the Indian experience. And I think the story which comes out, which I will just indulge in very briefly, is that wherever you use a resource, you have to be careful in ensuring that you do not hurt the environment, you do not exploit your consumer, and thirdly, wherever you are extracting this resource, development must happen there. Those areas which are providing these resources should not continue to be pockets of extreme underdevelopment, as has happened, I think, in the case of coal. In the case of coal in many situations across the world, not only in India, but also in China. I would say that those who do not change, I repeat again, the central theme which has been given, I think, virtually in the 21st century, the most important decision is the Paris Agreement, which came into force in November 16. And it is virtually an agreement to preserve the quality of air, an agreement about energy. Though the growth of CO2 emissions fell globally by about 1.8%, this was, of course, probably due to improvement in energy efficiency, as well as probably a slowdown in global economies. Investment in the upstream oil and gas sector has fallen sharply, as many of you in this room will appreciate, and the use of coal has begun to stall. The value of fossil fuel subsidies dropped in 2015 to $325 billion from almost $500 billion in the previous year, essentially from lower fossil fuel prices. The World Energy Outlook of the IEA said 30% rise in global energy demand to 2030. However, hundreds of millions of people will still continue to be without electricity. The future trend seems to be that the end use of energy globally, the most cleaner use, will be electricity, whether in homes or on the roads. Of course, major heavy-duty transportation, air travel, will continue to be heavily dependent on oil, which has ruled the world for quite some time. The motor of change, however, will be energy efficiency. And I think that has to be the mantra for the PetroCoal sector. Even though it is acknowledged that the fossil fuel sector will continue to be the bedrock of the energy sector for the next few decades, the oil industry, I think, has to consciously move towards reinventing itself. The shale revolution in the US has been a perfect example of how the monopolies on price of the oil-producing countries has been challenged by shale. The OPEC had challenged it in a way, at least some participants of OPEC, by bringing down oil prices, thinking that shale would collapse. But shale has responded by bringing its benchmark even lower. So I think the question is improving efficiencies across the sector. We have to move to a gas-based economy, expand our networks of pipelines, and provide long-term price stability. Because any investment which doesn't provide long-term price stability is going to be very unstable investment. If oil prices are stable, I think the movement away from oil will be slower. Improvements of efficiency in the transport sector are today an imperative. Gas-guzzling vehicles have no place in today's environment. The coal sector must commit itself to improving conditions around coal mining areas as well as in the production of electricity from coal. Because coal-fired stations, which have been considered to be a source of greenhouse gas emissions, SOx, NOx, they must improve themselves vastly if they are to meet the challenge of the future. What is unfortunate is that carbon is seen mostly as a waste and capture and store. No. Carbon is a precious resource which must be utilized effectively for useful substances, fertilizers, other petrochemicals, etc. We have to move in a direction where the production of electricity is not a cause of major pollution. If coal is to stay as a source of power generation. Some studies have shown, a very interesting study I was reading, the Shaanxi province in China. China has been expanding its coal production in the decade 2004 to 2014 by 200 million tons a year. They've reached an annual production of 4.6 billion tons a year, which is probably half of the world's production. They built power plants extensively. They used to make as many power plants in 1 year as we probably made in 5 years in India at one point of time. This situation, of course, is now reversed. India is catching up in the race. We will end up this 5-year plan by improving our performance quite substantially. However, the fact remains that China has embarked itself on a program of reducing substantially the per unit consumption of coal in the production of electricity. And they've taken a call in a situation of surplus that they will shut down those plants which are inefficient. Unfortunately, a lot of those plants got exported to India in the previous decade. It's a shame that some developing countries chose to buy that junk technology. I think it should be scrapped. The other point that I was making was, when I mentioned Shaanxi provinces, that though it produced the largest amount of coal in China, the overall development indices of that province were probably second lowest in the whole of China's development. And that situation is not very different when we look at Jharkhand, old Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. Per capita incomes, development, concern for the environment are something which are going to sting us in the long run. Now, I just said there are two experiences which I'm drawing. Europe, which we think is, of course, a major importer of its energy fuels, other than nuclear, has also got pockets of coal. Poland and Turkey are examples. But what has Europe done? Europe has started moving towards development of the appropriate technology for generation of electricity. And I think the world's first efficient power generating equipment, the FBC, is coming out of Poland at a scale which is about 500 megawatts. The moral of the story is that if coal is to be used for power generation, it has to become more efficient, we've got to work towards efficiencies of 50% at least of conversion. And similarly with oil. However, there's a catch. We're collecting large amounts of tax from fossil fuel products. They are being dammed and also being heavily taxed. They're funding a lot of development programs. But what is being collected in the name of carbon tax or clean energy funds is not getting back into cleaning up these fuels in this sector, and is finding its ways into other developments. That is a tendency which we have to seriously look at, because the story of renewables is also going to be a story of replacement of our energy sources. And replacement of traditional energy sources require the world economy to be booming and stable and rich, because a lot of investment of funds is lying in this sector. And if this sector stalls or goes down, these funds are not going to come back into the banking institutions. The World Energy Council in October 2016 came out with 3 scenarios. And I think for Europe, they were working out 3 scenarios called modern jazz, in which they said fossil fuel share will be 25%. The unfinished symphony, where you go clean, look for old age population, their longevity, quality of life, quality of environment, is 16%. But then there's interestingly a scenario called hard rock there. I'm not being perverse. But hard rock is a situation where you see a fragmented world, a weak economy that does not handle low growth and an aging people well and is debt-ridden. And there the share of fossil fuels is 42%, even in that study. So the moral of the story is that yes, the warning signals are there for us to see. It's for us to act, and act in time. Thank you very much.